Mic check, mic check, mic check. Let me just do a quick mic check. Okay, so this is a mic check. Oh, well, actually, the mic check's done. And I'm now live for the last 40 seconds. And I'm just looking real quickly at my Facebook just to see if I could see comments quicker this time. But otherwise, oh, that was my blue screen. Hi, welcome. Welcome to Friday. This was to be the last day of shelter in place here in Minnesota, but it's been extended by the governor. And as you know, we've got 3 more weeks now. And on top of that, there may be some other efforts to mitigate the pandemic situation that we're in and flatten the curve, as it were. I think Justin Trudeau was using plank the curve. And I thought that was very cool for Canadian to say that. I just thought shout out to my fellow Canadians. But anyway, today is about dance class online in the long term. And I've been doing these videos to just sort of help folks out that are in the dance community who are trying to teach their classes, engage with their students, share choreography online. Folks that are in the fitness world that are trying to move their dance from in person to in their bedrooms, in the living rooms, in their basements, and then beaming that out to the world to keep people engaged and active, while they're all at home self-distancing. And the first few videos I shared was really just about Zoom has become the primary tool in a lot of ways. And I wanted to share my experience with Zoom. My background is at higher education. I work for the university here in town, and I'm in health sciences. And one of the big things I do, the primary things I do, is helping distance learning. I do a lot of classroom recording. I do a lot of video conferencing. I do a lot of Zoom for doctors and dentists and nurses in the professional world to teach, the next up and coming batch. And so I thought I would take my experience in Zoom and apply that to help out folks in the dance community that maybe, were in Zoom for the first time. And I think that that's been well received. I'm very happy that things are working out for folks out there, and there's so much activity. It's actually kind of great to see all, because I don't get to any of these dance classes, but now I'm seeing more on social media what goes on in so many of my friends' dance classes, and then it sort of explodes out from there. So yay, dance community, for being so resilient and being able to make this transition. But having said that, why don't we go to the gist of today's talk? And let me just do a quick shift in look so that I'm not blocking so much content. Let's just get that done. All right. So one of the things that introduces this, let's consider this. I started at the top of this particular talk saying that we were supposed to end shelter in place today, but it's going another 3 weeks. Having said that, we've just finished about a month of this social distancing, and the situation has gone from it's an emergency, it's urgent, we need to get our content from our dance studios online so that we can teach from home, and now it's a little more emergent, I think, meaning we could sort of relax a little bit. A lot of you made this move, and you just got stuff up online as soon as you could. I think now, as we have 3 more weeks of shelter in place, and then who knows how long after of social distancing, we could start thinking a little bit more about long term and what this change might mean to the community, to the industry. And so we started with how do we get content online? Now we could start thinking about what content should be online. And as I said, at the top, Zoom has been widely adopted, and that's for real-time synchronous experiences. should asynchronous, should video on demand, should recordings, should they become more widely used? Or in other words, does the activity still really need to be done in real time? I mean, that's a pretty big question, because doing a lot of things in real time does involve software and hardware and other resources that just might not be handy right now. If you've been searching online, buying a webcam is really challenging right now. They're sold out on Amazon. They're sold out at Best Buy. I think Staples might have some on hand still, but none in stores. They got to get shipped to you. Um, and so what I was hoping with today's talk was just to start a conversation for folks and get people might already be thinking of some parts of this and other people are thinking about other parts, and how do we bring them all together so that everyone kind of sees all the different parts of this discussion. One of the things one of the opportunities we have right now is to think a little more critically about developing this alternative format of teaching. And so I think in a way this can take us back to some of the beginnings of why y'all started teaching, what you started teaching, how you developed your styles for your in-person studios, and to start thinking about things like, what were those underlying values that informed the way you taught or what you taught. What are your students' capacities for learning now in this situation, and how has that changed from their capacities for learning before this situation? And then things like what can be delivered reasonably well, and how do you measure reasonably well? And again, this sort of goes back to the idea of is synchronous really the primary, or can other tools be used to sort of help this process along? So one of the things I did want to actually, let me back out of this real quick. One of the things I wanted to mention is that we're in a period of requiring effective change management. And what is change management? So you can Google it. I was introduced to change management on my job. I do a lot of faculty support, and there are, as you imagine, in video conferencing and technology, there are a lot of changes in that field. And for faculty who've been teaching their content, they are subject matter experts. They know their stuff inside and out, and some of the content hasn't really changed, and they've really developed their methods. I now have to help them translate that from one technology to another technology to another technology. So there's a lot of change that goes on a continual basis. And change management is something that has sort of helped me in my job. As I mentioned here, it's a method to implement change, to control change, and to get buy-in. Those are my words, but really the idea is how do we do it? How do we sort of make sure it doesn't go out of control, it doesn't become chaotic? And how do we get agreement? Buy-in is really, how do we find points where we agree on this process? I do link it here. One of the things I thought was interesting, a recent study showed why change fails. And if you look at the top two, management does not support the change. Employees are resistant to change. Now, I know this was done in a business type setting, but think of it this way. Instructors or dance professionals maybe don't support the change. Students or other dance teachers in that hierarchy, maybe they're resistant to change. So the top two are talking about the people that are involved. The next thing is inadequate resources or budget. And I think that's been mentioned. How do you do this? How do you bring dance online if you can't afford the cameras or the switchers, or you can't even buy the webcams because they're sold out? And then just miscellaneous obstacles. And those are things like communication issues or other things in the environment that are sort of slowing the process down. So one of the things I sort of wanted to mention here, change management is the people side of project management when transition is the focus. So really change management, I think the big part of the sentence is change management is about people. And that's what what that's the opportunity that we have right now, is how do we help the people around us, the people in our in this dance community, manage this transition and progress successfully. So people side of things, I sort of wanted to put this out. This was again, let me just point out, this none of this is original to me. I'm really just trying to summarize things that have helped me out. And I'm in these meetings right now in health sciences where we're trying to manage this change for our faculty. And there's a lot of content I feel like can translate into the dance community. So I really want to bring this forward. I want to point out this isn't my graph, I mean, but looking at this right now, um, you've got overtime on the x-axis. We've got confidence, morale, and competence on the y-axis, and you can sort of see that denial, commitment, resistance, exploration. So the idea that as we move along timeline, we're in shock and we're in denial of what's going on. We go through this phase right here: anger, frustration, bargaining, fear of loss, uncertainty. I would like to think this is where we were in the past 3 weeks, and that we're now moving here for the next 3 weeks. And then by the time we come out of this, we will be integrated, we will be innovative, we will have new solutions that sort of inform the work that we do, the work that you do for the community out there, the dance instruction, the art making, the performance, the just sharing of your skill and content to the world. So, critical elements of change management of the many topics. I thought this would be good to put in today because this is the people side of things. Communicating out what the change is and the scope and its timeline. Training. How do we step up and get faculty, get teachers, get dancers to understand the tools that are there for them. And so that's a big part. Resistance management. And I think resistance management, and I really would like to sort of point out, it's not about how to show somebody how to show that somebody is wrong. It's really trying to understand why are they not in agreement, and how can you meet the needs for them that brings them over so that they are less resistant to this notion of change. And then employee coaching. The big thing about that really is the long term part. I mean, these are all continuous um, activities, but the coaching part is that when you roll out a new set of things to do in your dance studio or in your dance class or in your dance program, there ought to be continual checking in and helping folks sort of transition along in this ride of change. And I know a lot of you already know this, and I think again I want to get to the point that I'm just trying to frame this up in a way for folks that maybe see one side but haven't seen the other, or vice versa, that brings us all together. And again, the people side of things, you'll notice these questions are all about the who's. Who are the leaders? Who are the folks that can influence the work, the change you're trying to promote, or the work that's being done? And then who are the early adopters? And I'm a big fan of the notion of early adopters. We do that a lot in health sciences, where we find faculty who are more open to new technology, and we have them try out the technology or the method or to adjust their process. And they succeed, they fail. We analyze, we look at the experience. And then by the end of it, we've got somebody who can talk to her colleagues, who can talk to his peers and explain to other faculty in ways that us in support that we, are academic technologists, that we don't have because we're not necessarily faculty. So early adopters are kind of a big thing for you to think about. Who are the early adopters in your dance spaces that could sort of help cut through the tall grass and get through to a clearing on the other side? And then again, sort of going with the resistant management is who's going to be most impacted whether positively or negatively. And negatively is one of those big ones to think about, by the change. Who is most resistant, and trying to understand what is it that causes them to not be in agreement with you, and how do you sort of make that shift with them, or have them make that shift with you. So, having said that, I was sort of talking change management in a big way, and I was just trying to introduce the concept. It was, again, so useful for me to see that framework for the work that I do. I kind of hope that maybe by introducing the concept and you go off and you Google it, it'll help you in your framework. But what possible values would direct your classes? So, as I said at the outset, we're now in this emergent situation, no longer urgent, it's more emergent, and we have the opportunity to sort of look to re-examine what are the things that you are all doing. I know all of these items I have listed here, you probably thought of already. Some of you maybe did the first three, some of you did the last two, mix and match. So I really just want to throw this out there. These concepts came out of several meetings I've been in, where we're trying to not focus on the technology and really focus on how do we reach our students, how do we reach our instructors to manage this transition. So create an environment for community connections. And how do you do that with Zoom, right? I mean, isn't that something that you all have been struggling with? I've been hearing stories of how do we, people are wanting that kind of close connection, but we're having to physically distance. And so how do we cross that divide? And Zoom has tools for that. And there are other tools other than Zoom that kind of allow for this. And the idea is, how can we be intentional about creating that environment? Fostering engagement. Again, you'll look at that in your own way. Is your style mostly to lecture out or to sort of perform out and have them ingest, or is there a way for them to be involved in some of that? Students are the them that I'm referring to. Encourage reflection and critical thinking. This one, again, I'm sure this came up to you, all of you, in already, but when you're in an in-person class, encouraging reflection and critical thinking, that's all a very natural thing. You're talking with somebody and you're seeing body language, and they're communicating to you non-verbally as well as verbally. And we just naturally kind of encourage that out of people. But now that we've got this distance, how do we create an environment that allows our students to be more reflective and to continue to think critically about the content that they're presented with, about their own performance of that content, without a lot of the cues that you get from being in person. And again, I think the notion is that there are digital tools to help this out. It just has to be done in a different way. Inclusivity, equity, and accessibility. Again, I'm so absolutely certain the dance community is big about all three of these things. But now that we're in this space where technology is becoming a little more dominant, the inclusivity, equity, and accessibility, that takes on a slightly different color now. What access do people have to technology? What access do they have to the space to do these things in on their own? Are some people who are in a studio and can absorb choreography or movement or feedback just kind of organically when they're separated in a space? Do they still have that capability? And if not, how do we sort of bridge the gap for them, right? And that's kind of a question. One of the things that came out in our meetings also was focus on core principles for the lessons. I think the idea here was to try to not pack so much in, because it is harder now to share that content out. And so how do we get to the core of things so that the focus is where it needs to be? I think you hear some background noise. My son's on recess now. So anyway, so the next question I wanted to pose for people to think about is, how students' capacity for learning changed? And I think all of these things, I have anecdotal experiences with all of these from the dance community because I see it in chat. I see it in Laura's teaching. You know, she teaches at the high school and college level, and I'm sort of understanding from her the way she's understanding her students. And a lot of these make sense, and maybe you would have thought of it on your own as well. And I really did want to bring these to the forefront. This goes back, this one here, harder to stay focused the longer you stare at the screen. This goes back to the notion that don't pack so much in part because students' capacities to take in content entirely off of a screen, you know, is different than standing in, you know, 6 feet in front of you in a room. And I think there's a lot of anecdotal and of evidence of how our mental health is being impacted by this social distance or lack of, you know, lack of socialness. Is that a word? Um, we understand that spaces are not the same. Living rooms, bedrooms, basements, carpet, woods, linoleum. You know, some students I see actually have ballet bars in their spaces, and some students are having to rely on the kitchen counter. So, knowing that the spaces are not equal, you know that their capacity to learn material or to perform material have changed. And so that's something to consider. This one here, I feel like, is a big one. Lack of interpersonal exchanges. Um, you know, again, this is anecdotal, but how do you create an environment online that feeds people emotionally and kinesthetically the same way as when they're in person? And maybe that's not possible, but if that's not possible, how do you substitute or what can you substitute? And that's certainly something to think about. Um, Barriers to clarity are bigger. I think this one's a big one because for a lot of you that rely on Zoom, you'll notice that you can't have two people talking at the same time. And if they if they are, somebody's not being heard. And sorry, I just need to change out of this just to take a look at comments. If my iPad would behave. Sorry. This is a problem when you have to do your own self support. Oh, I just made the same mistake. It's not what I wanted to do.
Silas, come here.
Oh, I think they're coming out of recess.
Okay. Oh, wait, we forgot to check them out. Come here. Hey, let's play our ball game in the doorway.
All right. So, where was I? Barriers to clarity are bigger. Right. The point I really wanted to say there was it's easier for someone not to be heard now because there is a literal barrier. The Zoom microphone doesn't allow two people to talk at one time, so somebody gets cut off. So um, it's easier for someone to misunderstand something. And I think the delivery of content has to take that into account. And I'm sure this is something that you've all encountered. And so now what does that mean to methodology? What does that mean to the system that was done before and how can it adapt to what's moving forward? And I'm really curious to hear how people are overcoming this, you know. And then one of the things, big topics in health sciences is assessment and evaluation and the notion that it's not a level playing field. I mean, it never was, but it's even more unbalanced now. And how do we accommodate for the individual capacities to the limits that we all have in this new experience? And that's one of the things that came up a lot in a couple of these meetings is compassion and empathy, compassion and empathy, compassion and empathy. I feel like the dance community has a lot of that, so I know I'm very confident that that is going to be driving a lot of the engagement in the industry, in the community, and so when I would hear folks in my world have to sort of point that out a lot, it's just one of those things. I thought, okay, I know you know it. I just want to mention it. One quick second. Okay, I just had to do a real quick take recess outside. Okay, so what are new tools that I could add to the process, add to the learning process? What does this mean to you if I say consider more self-paced work? What does it mean to you if I say provide content to be learned off of video, and then before, so that's brought to class prepared, so that detailed work can occur in class? It makes a lot of sense in the work that I do, and I imagine, considering that this is a generation that grew up with YouTube, a lot of the, at least the dance students, the younger dance students, the notion of learning off of video is not that foreign, and the notion of learning on their own time is certainly possible. What does that mean when you redesign class time, right? Um, Make use of platforms that allow students to exchange ideas easily. And this is one of those things. Zoom does a good job of allowing virtual meeting collaborations. I think that it's a platform that is also allowing more collaboration in dance classes if people are using breakout rooms, for example. But even if that weren't the tool, there are other tools that allow for real time and not real time sharing, and can we leverage that to bring students together again, to go back to the notion of creating meaningful connections and community between the students and between the teacher and the students. One of the things that also comes to mind is the same content needs to be delivered multiple ways, and I think teachers do this already. The way that I see instruction, in person. But now that there's this extra barrier, this big barrier, there's an idea that, can you deliver the content so it's not all having to be watched? Can they read it? Can they listen to it? Can it be short form to sort of take into account the fact that looking at a screen all day is fairly detrimental to someone's learning process? And so then the idea is, what of your content can be sort of chopped up and delivered a couple of different ways, and just sort of thinking in those terms. Structured assignments was something that came out of a lot of from my other colleagues, and again, that goes back to the notion of learning capacities, that goes back to the notion of clarity, and that goes back to the notion of what is available to the student to perform the work. And this was something I talked about a lot last time. Well, actually, I didn't talk about it a lot, but it did come up. You're in a Zoom meeting, everyone turns on their camera. Well, but people are in their bedrooms or in their private spaces that they don't want out in the world, so they ought to be able to turn off their camera. But if you don't get to see them, how do you engage with them? How do you assess? How do you evaluate? And the same goes for chat boxes or forums. How much of a tool are they for students to be able to cross chat versus how much of a distraction is that, right? And I think it's balancing it in the same way that you would have balanced it in your in-person classes. Sometimes it was a distraction, but other times, the students come up with content on their own in their side chatter that totally informs the experience for the whole. And so how do you capture that? What I'm getting at, frankly, is there really shouldn't be the answer, all cameras off, all chat off, because there are great use cases for those to be on. Now, I was going to try to talk about what can be measured and what should be measured. But, I'm not, I don't know if you've got this yet. I'm certainly not a dancer. I've watched a lot, and I photographed a lot and videoed a lot. But do I have a sense of assessment? No, not really. But the thing that comes to mind for me to say here is, I think, like in the health sciences where I work, they are saying, bring more compassion, more empathy to assessment decisions than maybe what used to occur. And that's really the only thing I wanted to say about that. And I'm sure that there's already a lot of that going on. So, ideas for adapting digitally. Now I guess we're getting to some nitty gritty or what is it, rubber hits the road type statements. These are examples that we've sort of worked on, and I'm trying to apply it to a dance environment. Structure lessons to include uh, time for real-time classes and asynchronous classes on students' own time. This is that self-paced part. If it used to be an hour and a half of in-person class, should it be an hour of in-person with a half hour worth of uh, work on their own time? Should it be continue to be 90 minutes, but then have the expectation that they're doing work on their own time? And I think there's already a lot of that expectation that they're practicing on their own. But the idea that you send choreography out in a video so that by the time they get to class, it's there and it's familiar, and then you could pay attention to detail. Uh, I know that's a tool that people use rather than introducing something just fresh and from zero already. And so I'm just pointing out. I think that's a great tool. Provide context for lessons in a narrative form. You know, include podcasts or audio only. Share videos for what needs to be learned visually. What does that mean? Again, this goes back to the idea that what content can be shared in different formats to be ingested in different ways. And well, a great example is I do a lot of work with Shapiro and Smith. You know, as you know, my wife performs for the company, has performed for the company, and they were supposed to be in Duluth when the shelter in place hit, and we spun up really quickly uh, a way to engage with those students remotely. And that included creating 5-minute videos for them to watch that gave background. That included scripts that they could read and web pages that gave context for the work. And then that included video of breaking down the movement. And then there was a real time class. So far, there have been 3 classes held over Zoom that Laura's been teaching, and I think they've been going great. I feel like they've been going great. I know she's feeling pretty good about it, and the Duluth folks are feeling pretty good about it. And that's what that mix was: content to be taken in on their own time, and content to be done in real time. Cameras were on, chat was on, and there was just a lot of engagement. Um, Encourage students to share with peers and provide a moderated forum. That's the other thing, the sense of building community. So, and there are digital tools for that, and seeking those out. What are those tools that allow for cross chat between the students? This was an idea I thought. I don't know if I've seen anyone do it yet. They've done variations of it, but if the students record themselves outside of class using Zoom and then submit the video, and then while the instructor is watching the video, they're in a Zoom, they share their screen, they record, and then they give feedback. And that recording of them talking over the video that the student submitted gets sent back. And now you've got this asynchronous way of evaluation, of assessment, of seeing progress, and just sharing back and forth. And then again, the idea that focus your real time, your class time, on more detailed work and socializing. I mean, and giving more time for that rather than packing in a lot of content. And so then there's a focus more on the experiential part of the class rather than the content part of the class. Let's do a quick. I'm just trying to bring up. Why won't it do it? Oh, yep, this is being recorded. Sorry, there was a comment there that I think I missed. Okay, yep, this is being recorded. Or I'm sure Facebook is recording it. And then, I do have references. I guess why there were references to things I never even brought up. Let me just go back, and I think I've been going for 34 minutes, so I know I'm reaching an end point here. But I did want to bring up a couple of things. The idea of self-paced, the idea of video. I've found and I've been reading about in dance specific research, the notion that you're activating, or dancers are activating the same part of their brain when they're doing the act as when they're thinking about the act that they're doing. It's this notion of motor imagery, and uh, that concept, with the notion of neuroplasticity, the idea that our brains are just growing, and the more that we're exposed to something, or the more we repeat something, the better we become, the more we learn about it. Uh, that kind of feeds the notion that students learning by reading about a thing, watching the thing but not doing it, and then doing it, that there is a lot of possibility for success there, which I'm sure is obvious to a lot of people. And then maybe also not, because there are folks that might be thinking, well, how do you learn to dance if you're not actually dancing? Well, it's been actually fascinating, the notion that when they did a couple of studies, did some measures between dancers and non-dancers, and what happens when they're just looking at an activity in their brains, and what the differences are, and just the idea that you can still be equally as engaging when you're delivering the kinesthetic idea over the written word, or orally, or visually in video form, and that it still has efficacy in your dance classes. So that was one of the things I sort of wanted to talk about, and I didn't because I forgot to. That's about all I have at this point. There is this one I also wanted to mention, the notion of active learning classrooms. And I feel like dance studios are 100% what this is. But in higher ed, in where I am, active learning is student-centered learning. It's rather than the sage on the stage, the professor lecturing out, and then the students just taking it in and writing notes. The idea that they're doing most of their learning by with each other, by interacting with each other. And so what that means in some formats is that the instructor is giving a lecture recorded. The students watch that off time, and then they come to class with that material already in their heads, and they're digging into it. They're getting into detail by engaging with each other, and it's all moderated by the instructors. And that's a big part of what active learning is. And I feel like dance instruction is a lot like that, except it takes place kind of in a quicker amount of time. And so now that we're moving into this emergent period where some dance sort of has to transform in order to continue to thrive online, the idea of taking the active learning classroom concept and applying that, flipping the classroom, and applying that to dance instruction, I think it would be a great way of being innovative, and would situate the community in a better way once we come out of this, because now there's an extra set of tools. There's more methodology to sort of continue the education of the art form. Okay, I think that's all I've got for this talk today. I hope it was helpful. Again, the whole point of this was just raise topics that I'm encountering and trying to adapt that out to the community. And so if you've got any questions, continue to reach out. I still give out tips about using Zoom. So continue to send me emails about Zoom use. I can certainly help there. But in any other way, I kind of hope that what I've talked about today helps you to sort of start the conversation to get through the next 3 weeks of shelter in place, and probably the next couple months of whatever is after that. So take care, stay safe, and I hope you're all doing well.